Hey all, Brandon with FastDataScience.ai here, and welcome to another episode of This Week in AI. And if you'll notice, I've made a few small changes to the way that I do this show. Let me let you in on a little secret, and that secret is that this show is real. It's not scripted. I really have no idea what I'm going to say whenever I hit record on the camera. So what you get is as live as it can be. Maybe one day I will do this show live, but I'm not quite ready for that yet. Another thing you'll notice is that I'm not wearing any makeup, right? Like I'm not trying to make myself look any different. I also felt like the PowerPoints made it feel too scripted. So there's no more PowerPoints on this show. Instead, this show will focus purely on content. That is the news that hits artificial intelligence, machine learning, and data science each week that I read that I think is most relevant and want to share with you, hopefully to learn a little bit more about how this fast changing and evolving field is really impacting our daily lives. So let's go ahead and jump into the three articles that I want to talk about today. The first one is really all about how data science, machine learning, and artificial intelligence, and some of these really major companies that have had a huge impact in these areas are actually doing some social good. So NVIDIA is teaming up with the UN to boost data science in 10 African nations. The core of this article really talks about making sure that there is access to education that's required across the globe for people to understand how artificial intelligence, machine learning, and data science can really be applied to their work and their lives for improvement, because data are everywhere. So this article really talks a lot about setting up infrastructure that gets access to folks that don't typically have access to important infrastructure needed to really advance artificial intelligence. And that in particular, obviously coming from NVIDIA, means access to GPUs. So this initiative is all focused around how NVIDIA has teamed up with the UN to bring access to compute that allows folks how to learn how to use GPUs to train artificially intelligent models, machine learning models, data science, whatever the term of the day is. Okay, so that's article number one. Social good, really cool stuff. Link will be in the comments. The next article that I want to talk about, and yes, it's back, and maybe you caught it. I didn't say it whenever I introduced the show, but today's theme is GPT-3 and me. And so GPT-3, that large language model that OpenAI built, is back in the news, and it's back in the news in two really interesting ways. The first is through a conversation with Melanie Mitchell. Melanie Mitchell used to work in the ethics unit at Google. Actually, she was head of that unit for a while. And in this particular article, she engages in a conversation about the idea of sentience, given so much, sort of activity and all the news that was going around from the Google engineer who had claimed that its new model, its Lambda model, may be sentient. What Melanie really points out in this particular article and emphasizes back to the reader is that at the end of the day, these large language models are really still very complicated probability machines. That is, all they're doing is predicting the next most likely word given a series of previous words. And these models can use prompts to help determine which word is more likely than others that should be emitted in response to a given question or prompt or whatever it may be. She also goes into talking a little bit about what it means to be sentient. And I think what's really important, and me coming from a psychology background really understands, is that as our machines begin to become more sophisticated, that is, they start to act in ways that appear to us to feel really more human, that it's going to be a lot easier for us to attribute human agency to those machines, i.e., the idea that they may be actually conscious and sentient. Melanie talks really a lot and explains very well that there's a large difference between statistical prediction, which our brains do pretty well, but that's not all they do, and understanding. being able to understand the actual quality and meaning of that statistical prediction. She gives a really great example in here where she talks about breakfast and basically giving GPT-3 a prompt related to what I ate for breakfast being something around eggs. The difference that she talks about is that GPT-3 understands that breakfast and eggs go together, so it's easy to emit responses that make sense to a human asking questions about breakfast. The difference, however, is that GPT-3 shows no evidence that it understands what breakfast really even is. And so you would have to actually engage in a series of very different prompts in order to talk about what is breakfast. And I think that that is a core fundamental difference that a lot of researchers are still trying to work on in this space. There's a long article that has a lot of great content related to what some of those next steps may be in order to build more understanding in some of these, foundational artificially intelligent models. I think, core kind of take-home message is that we're not there yet. We're not even really close. Jan LeCun and others have talked about why that is. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that although these machines are getting very good at predicting statistically, given large amounts of data that they can learn from, they still don't have a good way of generalizing that information and organizing it into what Jan LeCun has referred to as world models. Other researchers also talk about these sort of naive psychological models that we have of the world that help us to do more than just predict things. They help us to understand things. And so I highly recommend reading this because it helps to, again, dispel some of, I think, the fear, whatever that right word is, that's circulating around the idea that these large language models may actually represent some kind of sentience or some type of artificial consciousness. Okay, so the last article that I do want to talk about that is also related to GPT-3, and it is the theme of the show, which is GPT-3 and me, asks a fundamentally interesting question that I never really thought to ask. But think about this. GPT-3 was trained on basically all of the information on the internet. Okay, so if we think through that, that also means that GPT-3 might know something about people on the internet, i.e. you, me, anyone else who has a YouTube show, or maybe who blogs, or who does other stuff, has other social presences on the internet, like the billions of people in the world who are members of Facebook. So what this article really tackles is, what exactly does GPT-3 know about me? And what's great about this article is it gives a particular example where a person engages with GPT-3 to talk about a particular individual who's fairly popular on the internet. If I scroll down here, that individual's name is Matt. And so what essentially the article talks about is what GPT-3 knows about Matt. And it turns out that GPT-3 thinks it knows a lot. Like the fact that Matt probably has a dog, and the fact that Matt lives at a particular address, and even has maybe a particular credit card type, which is scary. Well, it turns out a lot of the information that GPT-3 was coming up with was inaccurate. It wasn't actually true about Matt. And some of the reasons for that may be simply because Matt has talked about those things, but GPT-3 hasn't learned how to attribute those things to Matt's ownership. Again, I think this feeds back and relates nicely to the article I just discussed on whether or not these large language models are truly sentient. I think this is a great example that really demonstrates that they are not, that these models lack a true understanding of what it means to associate things together, like a person and a particular address, or whatever it may be, answers to questions. So hopefully you've learned a little bit of something today in this show, and I look forward to doing a lot more using this much more pared down version and much simpler way of sort of getting my content out to you. So I hope that all of you are inspired to go learn more data science, more machine learning, more artificial intelligence after hearing me today. Again, thank you and have a wonderful weekend. We'll talk next week.